When Harry Met Sally is often considered the greatest romantic comedy of the modern era. If you fast forward past Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, Clark Gable and Rosalind Russell, you can essentially go straight to 1989, Meg Ryan and Billy Crystal, when thinking about rom-com icons. There were, of course, great rom-coms in the 1960s and 70s. Starting Over, What's Up, Doc, Barefoot in the Park. And there were amazing rom-coms in the 1980s that predated When Harry Met Sally. Moonstruck, Bull Durham, Working Girl. But those films, for various reasons, get skipped when we think about the start of the modern rom-com. When we think about that, we almost always think about When Harry Met Sally. In her book, Romantic Comedy, Boy Meets Girl Meets Genre, Tamara Jeffers McDonald says the following.
Accounts of the development of the romantic comedy often seem to compress the time between Annie Hall in 1977 and When Harry Met Sally in 1989, telescoping the 12 years between them into a single impulse, begun by Allen's film and adopted by Nora Ephron, writer of When Harry Met Sally and writer-director of Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail. The particular brand of romantic comedy grouped together is New York-based, literate, self-reflexive, and may thus appear at first fairly homogenous.
When Harry and Sally was released, there were two wildly different reactions. Critics' reactions and viewers' reactions. Viewers loved the movie so much that they were the marketing campaign. The movie only opened in 41 theaters, a tiny theatrical release. But it ended up making over $1 million in those theaters, the second highest grossing opening weekend for a film on fewer than 50 screens behind Star Wars. And the movie ended up making over $90 million from there after opening widely across the country. All of this by word of mouth. Critics, however, panned the movie as lightweight and basically girly. The New York Times said the movie was a
often funny but amazingly hollow film, like the sitcom version of a Woody Allen film.
The New Yorker said, quote,
screwball comedies used to give the audience at least the pleasure of appreciating the intricate machinery of farce, of following the ingenious contrivances that keep the lovers apart and then miraculously unite them. That, however, would require the filmmakers to own up to the artificiality of what they're doing. They would have to stop pretending to be real and truthful and universal.
Even the critics who liked it, both the LA Times and the Chicago Tribune did, name-checked Woody Allen. Which is fair. The movie starts with title cards similar to an Allen film, takes place in Manhattan, and has some Gershwin songs in it. The constant comparison is frustrating to me, though. Woody Allen used a lot of Ingmar Bergman traits, and when that was commented on, it was remarked as a burst of inspiration, not theft. If it's not clear, I love When Harry Met Sally. It's worth the price of admission just to listen to Sally order a piece of pie.
But I'd like the pie heated, and I don't want the ice cream on top. I want it on the side, and I'd like strawberry instead of vanilla if you have it. If not, then no ice cream, just whipped cream, but only if it's real. If it's out of a can, then nothing.
Not even the pie?
No, just the pie, but then not heated.
Thing is, I follow her logic. The movie was a deeply collaborative process. Nora Ephron, its writer, interviewed people on set, friends, and Rob Reiner, the film's director and creator, for inspiration. She often quoted them directly in the final script. The friendship of Harry and Sally is actually based on Rob Reiner's real-life friendship with Billy Crystal. Billy Crystal improvised a lot on set. The film starts in 1977, when recent college graduates Harry and Sally are leaving the beautiful University of Chicago campus to move to New York City. They're driving together out of convenience and talk in order to pass the time.
You realize, of course, that we could never be friends.
Why not?
What I'm saying is, and this is not a come on in any way, shape, or form, is that men and women can't be friends because the sex part always gets in the way.
Harry is a broody, jerky guy who loves getting under Sally's skin. Sally is uptight and boundaried and doesn't fall for any of Harry's quote-unquote charm. They shake hands under the Washington Square arch, each starting their new New York lives to presumably never see each other again.
Well, have a nice life.
You too.
Except they do. They run into each other 5 years later at LaGuardia, where their dynamic is similar, if not worse than it was in the car.
You were a good friend of,
Amanda's. I can't believe you can't remember her name.
What do you mean? I can remember. Amanda, right? Amanda Rice.
Reese,
right. That's what I said. Whatever happened to her?
But then they run into each other again 5 years later. Harry, recently divorced, and Sally, recently separated from a serious relationship. And the two become friends, despite Harry's belief that men and women can never be friends.
You know, the first time we met, I really didn't like you that much.
I didn't like you.
Yeah, you did. You were just so uptight then. You're much softer now.
You know, I hate that kind of remark. It sounds like a compliment, but really it's an insult.
Okay, you're still as hard as nails.
They don't just become friends, but they become best friends. Harry can talk to Sally about things that he can't talk about with his male best friend, Jess, played by Bruno Kirby. And Sally can tell Harry that she isn't ready to date without being harassed like she is by her female best friend, Marie, played by Carrie Fisher. The new friendship dynamic is going well until one night, Harry and Sally sleep together. Harry thinks it should change nothing. Sally thinks it should change everything.
You want to act like what happened didn't mean anything.
I'm not saying it didn't mean anything. I am saying, why does it have to mean everything?
Because it does. And you should know that better than anybody, because the minute that it happens, you walk right out the door.
I didn't walk out.
No, sprinted is more like it.
We both agreed it was a mistake.
The worst mistake I ever made.
Sally, hurt by this rejection, tells Harry that she doesn't want to be his consolation prize anymore. Harry misses his friend, and then one day realizes that he doesn't want to be just friends with Sally. He wants to be romantically involved with her. In fact, he wants to marry her. He runs through New York City and tells her at midnight on New Year's Eve that he loves her in one of the best romantic monologues ever. Here it is.
I love that you get cold when it's 71 degrees out. I love that it takes you an hour and a half to order a sandwich. I love that you get a little crinkle above your nose when you're looking at me like I'm nuts. I love that after I spend a day with you, I can still smell your perfume on my clothes. And I love that you are the last person I want to talk to before I go to sleep at night. And it's not because I'm lonely, and it's not because it's New Year's Eve. I came here tonight because when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible.
The movie also has a framing device. Interviews with older couples, people who seem to be in their 70s and 80s, about how they met. These were famously based on real couples. Efron punched up the stories a bit, and they cast actors to play the real people. But the stories are pretty much true. Here's Tamar Jeffers McDonald on the role that these interstitials play in the film.
It took me a long time to come up with why they were there. And I think they're there to supplement and occasionally forecast or underline or undermine the main action. And so actually they're the complete heart of the movie. You could watch just the couch scenes and know where you were going. And the whole setup with these people who've known each other for a long time, even if they met once, fell instantly in love, and then didn't see each other for years, and then met again and were still in love, tells you that love lasts. And even though we're worried about Harry and Sally not getting together across these different decades that we see them and we spend time with them, the couch people assure us that they will be fine. And then eventually there they are at the end on the couch sitting together.
This movie shows us what a happily ever after actually leads to, and it shows it to us from the beginning of the movie. The first shot is of a couple in their 80s. The woman doesn't talk, but the husband tells us this story.
I was sitting with my friend Arthur Kornblum in a restaurant. It was a Horn-and-Dahlet cafeteria. And this beautiful girl walked in, and I turned to Arthur, and I said, Arthur, you see that girl? I'm going to marry her. And 2 weeks later, we were married. And it's over 50 years later, and we are still married.
He points to her when he talks about the beautiful girl. She smiles at him and touches his arm. It's not going to take Harry and Sally 2 weeks to get to that couch. but that couch is definitely the goal. I'm Vanessa Zoltan.
I'm Hannah McGregor.
And this is Hot and Bothered. Hannah, you're welcome. This job is already serving you.
Thank you so much for assigning me the homework of watching When Harry Met Sally, which I had never watched before, and which is so good.
Phew! Phew!
Yeah, thank goodness. That would have been really awkward if I'd come in and been like, this movie's bad and everybody who likes it is bad.
Even if you had just come in and been like, guys, overrated. The only response that would have allowed for us to continue is like, grand slam, they hit it out of the park, perfect film. But that's how you feel.
Correctly rated, deserves to be a classic of the genre, was incredibly delightful. You know, there's bits that don't age well.
Sure.
But it's a movie about gender, and gender politics have changed massively since 1989. So I think that kind of stuff, you place it in its historical context and understand what's going on. But like the crux of how well written it is and what incredibly good comic timing Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan have together is just like, it's timeless.
Yeah. Apparently, Rob Reiner, the director, would go and give the actors line readings, not for like, this is the emotion I want you to have, this is like the angle, but to give the rhythm. Be like, and the joke is rat-tat-tat-tat.
Yeah, I kept thinking about like vaudeville era patter comedy as I was watching. I was like, this is so much about timing, and in order to nail the timing of comedy like this, you've got to know your lines so well, but you've also got to be a really good listener. You've got to be like really kind of in the zone with your comedy partner. And that doesn't work between everybody. And it like really works between these two.
I just have to tell you one quick story, and I promise not to give all the trivia about this movie. There are other podcasts that are about that. We're about looking at the love story of it. But the scene in which there is a split screen where Jess and Marie are in bed and Harry and Sally have called them respectively, and all four of them are on the screen in 3 different places. That took 60 takes.
That really checks out, because that is millisecond timing. Like everything's got to happen at exactly the right moment. Oh, that's so good. I feel like in modern cinema, we have a lot of conversations about like practical effects and how impressive it is to do practical effects. And I'm like, more attention on the 60 takes it takes to get comedic timing perfect.
Oh my God. So they were on 3 different sound stages, but they all had earpieces in so that they could hear each other. And Bruno Kirby, who plays Jess, was interviewed because apparently they nailed it on take 20. And he blew it in this like line to Carrie Fisher to Marie at the end where he goes, "You will never have to be out there again." And he just like felt awful, you know, and it took 40 more takes. And so this was like some kind of primal wound for him. But what he said was the hardest was that Meg Ryan, that's one of Sally's lines, was his cue, but his character wasn't supposed to hear Sally. And so how to like wait for Sally to say something, but pretend like you couldn't hear it, but respond both to Marie and to Harry, Marie who's literally there and Harry who's not there. The like the mental gymnastics of it was just so much. And I think, yeah, that's like a vaudeville, right? Like it's a circus act. It's incredible.
Man, I just want to talk about the skill of these actors forever. But as you pointed out, that is also not what we do here. What we do here is talk about the love story. So let's talk about this love story.
Okay, so the question is, what does this movie believe about love? And I would say that one of the big things that I think that this movie believes about love is that love and marriage is about timing. Right? There are all of these interstitials in the movie, these like famous interstitials with mostly older couples until Harry and Sally telling these stories about how they met. And they met, 50 years ago. But all of the stories are about timing to some extent, right? I saw her and then I got, immediately had to go say hi to her. We didn't meet. And then we met. It's all about like the serendipity of the right person at the right time.
Yeah.
And with the title being what it is, right? When Harry met Sally, they meet again and again and again.
Yeah.
And they aren't perfect for each other when they meet and they're 21. And they aren't perfect for each other when they meet and they're 26. And they aren't perfect when they meet at 31. It's only at 32 that they are perfect for each other. And I just love that it's really a movie that has a very strong thesis on the right person at the right time.
Yeah. And the fact that, they both had a lot of growing up to do and a lot of transforming to do, and that they needed to have other relationships that shaped them. I think sometimes there is a tendency in romance as a genre to treat every relationship that came before our primary relationship as a mistake or as wrong. Like if we're going to believe that this relationship is perfect, we have to believe that the other ones were not. And I think that this movie really shows us that, like, those previous relationships weren't perfect, but they were right for those people at that time. They were the relationships that they were ready to have or needed to have at that moment in their lives. And they changed and grew as a result of those partners into the people who were right for each other. I also was really struck by those interstitial scenes. I mean, it's such an interesting formal choice to pop them in throughout the movie, these little interviews. And the other thing that really stood out for me about them was that, all of the stories are different. Mm-hmm. That they, some of them met when they were really young, some of them met when they were much older. And so there's also this sense that, like, there isn't one version of a love story. There isn't one correct way to fall in love with somebody. There's lots and lots of versions of how people find each other that then leads to long-lasting love.
Yeah. There's even an arranged marriage in one of those interstitials, right?
Yeah.
What's something that you think this movie thinks about love?
I think that this movie is really premised on the tried and true claim that opposites attract, because boy, does it spend a lot of energy establishing for us that Harry and Sally are opposites in every way that matters. She's high maintenance, he's low maintenance. She is a wasp, he's Jewish. She does tap dance, he goes to the batting cages and fights with kids.
I got a stack of quarters here. She's really into checking every single letter to make sure it is appropriately addressed, self-addressed, and stamped again before she puts it into the mailbox. And he's just going to shove them all into the mailbox.
And part of what I found pleasurable about this opposites attract dynamic is that I kept sort of expecting it to fall into lazy gender tropes, to be like, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. But it's not that. It's just these are two people who are pretty much as polar opposite from each other as they possibly can be. And that the very oppositeness is what creates this charge between them that keeps them coming back to each other, right? That there's this sort of energy generated by the sheer force of their disagreement and their difference that draws them back together.
Can you give me an example of that, just so I'm sure I know what you're saying? Like, when is a moment that their oppositeness is what pulls them back together?
I mean, for example, their second and third meet cutes, Meg Ryan, Sally, recognizes him and simultaneously wants to avoid interacting with him, but also can't help but be pulled into disagreeing with him. And he recognizes her and is like, oh man, I love ruffling this woman's feathers. Like, it is fun for me to get a rise out of her.
Yeah.
For example, their second meet cute where she's making out with Joe in the airport and Harry has worked with Joe and recognizes him and they end up on the same plane. And then, Harry's like, Sally Albright, I remember you. And then takes the offer of of switching seats so he can sit next to her. Like, he takes that offer not because he's like, my good old friend, but because he's like, this is fun. This is fun how much we disagree with each other. This is going to be pleasurable for me.
Yeah, I love that. And the more she kind of wants to avoid him, the more he's like, no, I want to be near you. And she's not playing hard to get. And he's not being like a creepy stalker. It's this like enjoying the nudge.
You know, as we're talking about this, you know, it's a classic film trope. Opposites attract. It's at the heart of so much like screwball comedy and romantic film history. Do you think it's true outside of films? Like, is this just a movie thing, or do you think opposites attract in real life?
I think that they're one of the things that can attract. Like, I don't think that they're the only things that do, but I'm almost always in relationships with extroverts, and I am an introvert. And I think that there's something good for me about being in relationships with extroverts because I will never leave the house. I will just stay home and read and watch When Harry Met Sally. But the extroverts in my life, I think what they mostly do is judge me for my social anxiety. And so I follow through on the commitments that I've made. I'll be like, I know I should call Hannah tonight, but I'm so tired. And they'll be like, you're going to feel better after you talk to Hannah. And I'm like, okay. Right?
Yeah.
I think that there are times where it can be a real gift. I also think that there are times where it can destroy a relationship. If someone is like always dirty and someone else is always clean and it like starts to feel like disrespect, I do think that opposites can be a real gift or they can be a real hindrance. And like these two people are opposites in a lot of ways. And then obviously they're not in a lot of ways. They both want to go to a museum. They both want to eat deli food. They both like going on long walks around New York. They both moved to New York not knowing anybody else in the city straight from college, right? Like
they both love Casablanca. When he calls her and she's watching it, he goes, channel, please.
Channel, please. That's right. So like, yeah, as much as they are opposites, they're also, I think that there has to be a balance of both.
Yeah. You know, when I think about in a lot of my most intimate relationships, I do get drawn to people who are like very different from me in the places where I think I enjoy being challenged to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your introversion, extroversion is a version of that. You know, there's a pleasure in relationships with people who are very, very similar to you because there's an ease to that. And there's a pleasure in relationships with people who are really, really different from you because there's a possibility for growth. When I think about opposites attract, what I also think about is how much men like arguing with me and how little I enjoy it, but I am very good at it. And so I've spent a lot of my life doing it because it was a way that a lot of men in my life preferred to interact via debate and argument. And because I was good at it, they were like, well, you must enjoy it. And when I got older and began to articulate, like, oh, I actually don't enjoy this as a way of interacting with people, they were like, but you're good at it, so you must secretly enjoy it. Which, let's talk about the assumptions underlining that claim. But, you know, that basic premise of like, you must secretly enjoy sparring with somebody who totally disagrees with you about stuff is not one that resonates with me personally. But the idea that you might be drawn to somebody who's deeply different from you because you have something to learn from them, I think has a real truth to it.
Yeah. Okay. So Hannah, we've talked about what this movie knows that it believes about love. What does this movie not know that it believes?
Okay. I've got a real thesis for this one, because part of the central way that this movie circulates is as being about the claim or proving the claim that men and women cannot be friends. That's in so many of the summaries, and it's like on the poster, and it's like they try, but men and women can't be friends. And I think this movie is about literally the opposite. Like, yeah, that's a claim that Harry makes when he's 21. He says men and women can't be friends, but like he says a lot of shit at a lot of times that we're not supposed to take as gospel. And I think it does a disservice to this movie to claim that they're not really friends.
Yeah.
I think they are really friends. I think they have a beautiful friendship. I think romantic love grows out of that friendship. I don't think romantic love growing out of a friendship invalidates the fact that that was a friendship. In fact, I think the nature of their love is premised on what good friends they were and how well they got to know each other as friends. So I actually think that the movie believes the opposite of what it says it believes.
Yes. Can I give you a little behind the scenes gossip?
Please.
They weren't supposed to end up together. In the original storyboarding, it was supposed to be about the two of them becoming friends, sleeping together, and then deciding to still be friends. And what happened was Rob Reiner started writing and making this movie while he was heartbroken with his divorce of Penny Marshall. And then a couple of weeks into filming, he got introduced to a woman and fell madly in love with her. And they have been married ever since. And so he became less cynical about love. He was very optimistic about friendship. He was friends with Nora Ephron. He absolutely believed men and women could be friends.
Yeah.
But by the end of filming, they were like, these two people have to be together. People are just going to be mad if they don't.
Yeah. But that core, right? He absolutely believed men and women can be friends. That is there in the movie. And I don't think that the changed ending betrays that.
I agree.
I really think that they're really friends, and I love their friendship. And hearing that pieces of their interaction was based on Billy Crystal and Rob Reiner's friendship reinforces for me that they took seriously that they wanted to give them a friendship that felt like a lived-in friendship, and it does. And I love getting to see a romantic love that grows out of a real friendship. I love all of the scenes where they're just being friends and goofing around together.
Goofing around and helping each other, right? He's helping her get a Christmas tree up to her house. She's helping him redecorate his divorced empty apartment. They're out shopping together for Jess and Marie. They're trying to set each other up on dates. They're actively making each other's lives better.
Yeah.
And calling each other out on their bullshit. The great orgasm scene at Katz's Deli is born out of her accusing him of being a misogynist to women, right? They're actively trying to make each other better and holding each other to high standards.
And he's trying to de-wasp her as much as he can by being like, hey, is it possible you actually have a feeling about your long-term relationship ending? And she's like, no, never had a single feeling in my life. And he's like, okay, I think maybe you had some feelings in there somewhere. They push each other in ways that make them grow and make them better.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think the subtext of the movie is?
I think that the subtext of this movie, this is a joke that I heard from the film critic Dana Stevens, that sometimes love stories, instead of being I do, are you'll do. And I think that this movie does believe in the you'll do. Marie, Carrie Fisher, just desperately wants a husband, right? She desperately wants a husband. And she connects with Jess, and that's it. Oh my God, I loved your magazine article so much that I just quoted it to you. They are living together 4 months later. It's that's all it took. Harry and Sally finally get over themselves. They are married 3 months later.
Yeah.
It's just this very highly romantic idea of oh my God, are you my perfect person? With I think a very unromantic idea of oh my God, I can stand you. Great, that's it. Let's get married. In Harry's final big romantic speech that he says to Sally all of the things that he loves about her, the only one that's of any substance is you're the last person who I want to speak to before I go to sleep at night. The rest of them are he's kind of ribbing her. I love that you take an hour to order a sandwich. I love that I can smell you on me. It's just how little people need in order to want to be with someone for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. What really strikes me about that is this idea that you're not going to find somebody out there who's perfect.
Right.
Because people aren't perfect. People are weird and messy and have hang-ups and have quirks. But if you can find somebody whose weird, messy quirks feel charming to you or are not deal breakers, and somebody who you like spending time with and you like listening to their voice on the phone, you know what? That'll do for sure.
Yeah. And so it's just funny because it's like those interstitials, which to some extent we can think of as like a complicated thesis on the movie, they aren't hugely romantic, right? It's, I knew immediately, like you do about picking a melon.
Oh, a good melon.
A good melon, like you know about a good melon. Like these are not deeply romantic stories. Does the movie think that these tiny things are romantic? Or does the movie think, God, humans are weird and look what counts for romance?
I mean, that question, I think part of the difficulty in this movie of distinguishing between like what claims it is textually making about romance and what claims it is subtextually or accidentally making about romance. I think part of the messiness there might in part be accounted for by that sort of little backstory that you shared of Rob Reiner going in wanting this to be a movie about people not ending up together and then falling in love during the process of making the movie and deciding that it's going to be a movie about people getting together at the end, that there's a kind of ambivalence in it of this question of like, is this good or bad that this is what relationships are like? I think we're struggling a little to pin what the actual thesis of the movie is versus what emerges through the actual things that happen in the movie. I think because there is some sort of like ambivalence at the heart of it.
Yeah. The other thing that I feel like I just have to say is that 1989, this is 2 years after Nora Ephron married her third husband, who she thought of as like the true great love of her life. And it was the previous decade, less than 10 years prior, where she was like publicly humiliated by Carl Bernstein and wrote Heartburn, this like revenge novel about his cheating on her while she had a 2-year-old and was pregnant. So she like has known the deep cynicism of heartbreak when she's writing this, but she is newly, madly in love. And so I think Rob Reiner and Nora Ephron were both, who like to a large extent really co-created this film, both like knew the deep despair of life ruining heartbreak and this like new fresh hope of the possibility of love. And so I think the ambivalence is just shown in this movie, you know, and it is, we don't see like two old actors portraying Harry and Sally 50 years in the future being like, and then we fell in love and got married 3 months later and we've been married 50 years. Like, we don't know if they make it.
Okay, I know that we were talking about ambivalence and love, but I simply am going to have to hit the emergency stop button because I do need to briefly talk about Jimmy Breslin.
Yay! Okay, why Jimmy Breslin? Can you remind people of where his name comes up in this film?
100%. So there is a scene in the movie when Harry and Sally and Marie and Jess go on a double date where they're trying to set up Sally with Jess and Marie with Harry. It doesn't go well.
It doesn't go as planned.
It doesn't go as planned. Jess and Marie end up together. But we've got this like little brief snippet of a conversation that Sally and Jess are having because they are both writers. And so they are talking about writers that have inspired them. And Jess is talking about how much he loves Jimmy Breslin and that he's the reason why he started writing. And Sally is kind of disgusted. She's not just like, oh, you know, I'm not as much of a fan. She's like, okay, well, let's just say that like I don't read Jimmy Breslin. And she says it in this way that immediately made me go like, oh, Jimmy Breslin is signifying for a 1980s New York-based audience in a way that I don't understand. And that kind of moment, like a little drop of a intertext like that, always makes me want to be like, okay, well, what the heck is up with, like, I didn't know who Jimmy Breslin was.
Me neither.
Period. So Jimmy Breslin was a Irish Catholic working class reporter who like never finished college, came up in New York and wrote for New York Magazine and for a bunch of other New York newspapers. He was sort of part of the new journalism movement. Like he's compared to Norman Mailer. In fact, he ran on a city council ticket with Norman Mailer, or he's compared to, you know, Charles Bukowski, this kind of like working class writer who covered a lot of stories about New York in a way that really centered working class people. So one of his most famous pieces is that he wrote about the funeral of JFK by interviewing the man who was the like Black war veteran who was digging his grave. So he was really interested in like telling important stories about New York through a working class lens. He wrote a lot about the mafia. He got the shit kicked out of him by the mafia because he was writing a lot about the mafia. He wrote scathingly about the police. He was very anti the NYPD. He hated Donald Trump and called out the media of the time for covering him too much and said, you are turning this guy into a celebrity by virtue of the fact that he'll always give you an interview and you need to ignore him because he is a bad dude. So Jimmy Breslin on the right side of history on a lot of stuff. He was also, like a lot of the other men I have compared him to, super sexist and super racist.
Yeah, I was waiting for and he beat his wife because that's what Norman Mailer did. He stabbed his wife.
Now, he seems to have not been quite as horrifyingly misogynist as Norman Mailer was.
But that's a very, very low bar.
That bar is subterranean. Yeah. Absolutely. There was, in the wake of this movie being made in 1990, there was a controversy where he wrote, you know, an op-ed, a column where he was joking about how his marriage was suffering because his wife had gone into politics and so she like wasn't making dinner anymore. And a young Asian American woman wrote in response to the column and said like, this is really sexist. And he responded by in print calling her a number of racial slurs. So when we think about why is Jess so into Jimmy Breslin and why is Sally actively put off by that, I think it's a complex question of class and gender. I think that it's signaling simultaneously that like Sally is not from a working class background. We get no sense at any point that she has class solidarity, that she would be somebody who, as a writer, as a journalist, is interested in like gritty, realistic writing that really sort of lets us see the like seedy underbelly of New York. But also, she's an intelligent professional woman. She's probably not going to be drawn to a writer who obviously has disdain for women.
Yeah.
Jimmy Breslin, rich text.
Super rich text. And it's like a certain kind of bravado that both Jess and Harry have. On watching the movie this time, in that opening scene where Harry and Sally are in the car, Harry is terrible in that opening scene. And so it makes sense. Like, I don't know. I hated the people in college who were like, I want to be a writer because of Charles Bukowski, or like in my age, it was David Foster Wallace. There was just like an arrogance and a misogyny, right, to the way that they thought about fiction. And I don't know, Jess doesn't not have that same bravado that Harry has.
Yeah.
These are kind of dicks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hannah, our theme this week is still Meg Ryan. What did you learn about Meg Ryan watching When Harry Met Sally?
Okay. A couple of things. One, that Meg Ryan looks good in every possible imaginable hairstyle.
She can't help it.
And we truly do see every hairstyle for 12 years.
Yeah.
Every possible hairstyle. Man, did this movie make me want to get a perm. Don't have any hair, can't get a perm, but loved it. But also, in a way that Sleepless in Seattle didn't demonstrate to me as clearly, in When Harry Met Sally, I think we see what a brilliant comic actor she is. She is so funny. She is so good at that patter timing. I think that my vague cultural understanding of Meg Ryan really pigeonholed her as a romance actress. Like I hinged on the rom part of the rom-com, and I think have not fully respected her skill in the com half of that equation. And she, for me, feels like a sort of like a Kristen Wiig figure. Like, this is just brilliant comedy, excellent timing, excellent face acting, excellent physicality. And that part of why the movies that she's in are rom-coms is because that is kind of what's available for women comic actors.
Yeah, she's fucking hilarious.
So hilarious.
This was like kind of her breakthrough movie. She had been in Top Gun before this, which she has a pretty minor part. In everything else, she was on a soap opera, but everything else she had a small part or it was a small movie. And then here she is above the title of like a major release. Rob Reiner is coming off of This Is Spinal Tap and Princess Bride, right? Like two mega blockbusters.
Yeah.
And is known to make these incredible comedic movies. And he hires Nora Ephron and he hires Meg Ryan. And she was like, right, like she's doing soap operas in Top Gun. She's the wife of the guy who dies. Like she is doing these like dramatic roles and she gets hired because she's so fucking funny.
So funny. She's so good at it. And it is really skill-based. And I know that there are a lot of contemporary conversations about how few roles there are for women in comedy. And it was interesting to me, even sort of looking at some of the historical context for this movie, that it came out the same summer as Batman, and they were really worried about its box office success compared to, I think it was Batman and like an Indiana Jones was also coming out this summer.
The third one.
And they were just like, we're going to get crushed in the box office by these like summer blockbuster action movies. And here we are making this like kind of quiet movie about conversation. So they did this limited release thing where they only put it out in a few theaters and let it sort of gather word of mouth. So it's like they weren't even sure with Rob Reiner and Billy Crystal. And a huge part of why it did so well is that Meg Ryan was a revelation for everybody who saw this. They were like, who is this person? She is so wildly charismatic and she's so funny. And she's so good at doing all of the big emotions. Like the scene where she calls Harry because she's found out that Joe is getting married. And he comes over and she's doing all of these great physical bits with Kleenex.
Yep.
That she's like blowing her nose and then just throwing the Kleenex on the floor. And it's all just immaculate. And it's like there's so much skill in comedic timing, in physical comedy. I'm going to ask for the Patreon scene watch along that we watched the classic I'll have what she's having diner scene, which I only knew out of context, but in context I'm like, a genius. Meg Ryan, a genius.
Yeah. The moment of comedic timing that really hit me this time is in one of the very last scenes. She's at a New Year's Eve party with Jess and Marie, and Harry is not there, and she's there with someone else, and she doesn't like him. And so there's all these, like, he spins her out, and she's sort of at an angle and says something to Marie about how she wants to leave. And then she, like, pretends to laugh at a joke, stops laughing, looks at Marie, and is like, I'm leaving, and then looks back and starts laughing.
Marie says, you'll never get a
Get
cab.
a cab. She's like, and you believe it is naturalistic acting, right? Like, it is very shticky, but, like, it doesn't come off as shticky in the way that she does it. She's so naturalistic with her acting.
Yeah.
What occurred to me is that Meg Ryan is able to play a like simmering anger. There is a theory in chaplaincy. There's like one of 3 questions that you should ask everybody. And it's, what are you sad about? What are you mad about? Or what are you scared of? That like, it's either fear, sadness, or anger that is like under everyone, at least like anyone in distress, right? You're going to be like, oh, my mom is behaving in this way that's driving me up the wall. And it's like, okay, are you scared? Are you sad? Or are you mad? And I don't think of Meg Ryan as someone with a lot of anger. She's like so sweet that I would think sad or scared about her. I think like if you asked me, she has so much rage in this movie. She is incredulous about Harry's chutzpah, right? Like, you're hitting on me and you're dating my friend. Ew. She can tap into fear and sad, which is that scene where she finally kisses Harry, right? She's like sad and scared, and that's what gets her vulnerable enough to kiss Harry. But throughout this movie, I would say her character is angry a lot. And I love watching like teeny, happy, gummy Meg Ryan be pissed.
Yeah, we really do see her full range. And she's got the range.
Yeah, she really does. I'm like, oh, it's not just because of the clothes. She is just that great.
Yeah, it is because of the range. And it's also because, shouting back to our last episode, part of it does absolutely hinge on her small, white, blonde, blue-eyed physical appearance. Like, kind of the whole joke of her character through this movie is that she is a wasp. Like, she is the waspiest wasp you can imagine. And that's played for comedy a lot, but it is also what makes her recognizable again as a kind of every woman character on the screen.
Yeah.
Just real quick, one last thing on the theme of Meg Ryan. Did you have a favorite outfit?
Yes, I love especially the modern day outfits. The outfit from when she's 21 that like, is terrible. The knee-high socks with the pleated shorts with the cardigan and the button-up. Like, it's not my thing. I legitimately, for years, when I watched this movie as a kid, thought she was playing a flight attendant. And that's why Joe was dropping her off at the airport. That outfit looks like a flight attendant's outfit. But then she's sitting on the airplane, and it made me very confused about flight attendants' jobs and when they were allowed to sit for like a lot of years, because that costume absolutely cued to me that she was definitely working on this airline. But once we re-meet her, every outfit is perfect, but the layering is really what does it for me. The sweater with the blazer, with the crossbody bag, with the hat and the gloves, but you don't need a coat because you're so well layered.
Correct. That is the best outfit in the movie. The hat, the leather gloves.
It's 2. There are 2 different times.
Oh my God. And it made me want to get into gloves.
I know. But like the thing about her, to your point, right, is that she is so skinny that you could put all the layers on her and she's still going to look small. And so it is still fetishizing her smallness. But, oh man, I lust. I like really am very much in love with her in those scenes. I mean, the thing that watching this movie this time made me realize was how exhausting it is to be a woman. I'm like, Harry dresses exactly the same throughout the whole movie, and he always looks fine and great. Whereas Sally's outfits and hair and everything has to change every time we see her with the seasons. And I'm like, God damn it, it's easier to be a man. You just like sweatshirt and jeans, and you're set for the rest of your life.
It's just now you just have to make choices about how long your sideburns are going to be.
That's it. And like, are you still rooting for the Yankees? Yes. Okay.
Uh-huh.
It made me pretty mad about that for her.
Oh, yeah. Those perms don't perm themselves.
They do not perm themselves. I do love, as always, that the wilder and freer, the version of Sally that actually makes a move on Harry is full curly girl.
Yeah.
You're not ready for sex until you're full curls. So, Hannah, please finish the sentence for me. You should watch this movie if
you want to see Meg Ryan represent every hair trend between 1977 and 1989 impeccably. All right, your turn. You should watch this movie if
You want to see how America learned about karaoke, because it is by watching Harry and Sally sing Surrey with a Fringe on Top on a karaoke machine in a Sharper Image store in Midtown Manhattan. And that is how we all learned that you could do this wild thing of have backup vocals and music and the lyrics printed on a piece of paper and read it out loud. It was mind-blowing.
Magic.
Next week, we're going to be watching the final scene and doing a deep dive on This Happily Ever After. And if you want to hear us discuss the famous orgasm at Kat's Deli scene, you can sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod. So as we talked about in today's episode, one of the most iconic scenes in When Harry Met Sally is this dual phone conversation where Jess is talking to Harry and Marie is talking to Sally about the night that Harry and Sally have spent together. In watching this scene, I found it fascinating, the idea that a couple would have two different phone lines in one apartment on either side of the bed. And it felt like this was a moment. This was a moment in history in which this was the case. So we wanted to dig into what the history of the telephone and telephone lines were and how they impacted people and relationships. So we are going to get Claude S. Fischer on the phone. Claude Fischer is a distinguished professor at the Graduate School at UC Berkeley. He has worked on the history of technology with the study of the early telephone's place in social life. Among his many books are America Calling, A Social History of the Telephone to 1940, and Made in America, A Social History of American Culture and Character. Let's get him on the phone. Hello, Professor Fischer. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Hope you're well as well.
Thank you. So we are talking over Zoom, not telephones. But I am wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the history of how telephones came into the home. How did they go from like a new business invention into something that in theory everyone had in their house?
Well, it's an interesting story. The phone first came about in the late 19th century, and the people who were selling it thought of it very much as a business device and tried to sell it to factory owners. They sold a lot to pharmacists and so forth. But they also got the idea that the house was a business in some ways, and the housewife was the head of the household business. And you could sell affluent men on leasing telephones by convincing them that their wives would do a better job at the household management with the telephone. And so it started to appear in the late 1890s, early 1900s in middle class, upper middle class homes, pushed by the idea that the wife could use the telephone to order groceries, to call the doctor, in case of emergencies, to call the police. And it made some penetration that way as a household management device. The dramatic story about the telephone in the home, and one that I tell in my book on the history of the telephone, is the extent to which people found it so gripping as a social media. If I might say, first social media. So you start to see people, and here disproportionately women, using the telephone to try to stay in touch with family and friends, or to just engage in what one telephone executive dismissively called idle chit-chat.
Ah, yes, of course.
And then by the 1920s or so, the telephone industry, particularly AT&T, the telephone industry at that period, got new ownership and a new management that started thinking of the telephone not as some kind of fancy version of a telegraph, which businessmen were familiar with, but actually as its own social device. And they actually started marketing the telephone It started saying, you ought to get a telephone so you can call your friends and call your family, stay in touch, send Christmas greetings, and so forth. And so you get, by the arrival of World War II, at least in middle class homes, the telephone becoming an everyday device for both getting practical things done, but also for sociability.
Amazing. So everything I know about the history of telephone lines, I know from TV and film. So like that there was like one telephone in the house and it was in a kind of public place. And then there were party lines and operators. And then eventually most people had a single line in their home and then multiple lines in the home. Can you walk me through sort of the history of like phone lines in the domestic space? Like what is a party line?
Okay. So one way phone companies set up lines in the early days and try to keep the costs down is that more than one family would share an incoming line into a building or a neighborhood. And that saved, obviously, putting in wires. And then the line would go into, let's say, 4 different directions to 4 different households. And this was called a party line because it shared it with many parties.
Mm-hmm.
Some people tried to party on these lines, but that didn't go very far.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way one knew that an incoming call was for one family or another was that the ring would be slightly different. 2 short rings, 1 long ring. And that would indicate, oh, this must be for the Smith household and not the Jones household.
Huh.
And this was a way that telephone spread in the 1900s, 10s, 20s, 30s. Basically, they were pretty much gone by the 50s and 60s. People did not like party lines.
Yeah.
I mean, except for the neighborhood nosy body who did love party lines. So the story that people would listen in on others' conversations, there are a number of documented cases that this really was not uncommon. That, yes, the ring was for the house next door, but if you picked up your phone quietly and you kept your hand over the mouthpiece, you might be able to hear whether, Johnny is still dating Susie or whatever.
Yeah.
It was quite clear to the phone companies early on that customers wanted to move to single lines, even at a higher price. So that was party lines. Operators were used for the first 30 or 40 years. And in some places, a lot of this lasts a lot longer. Instead of just dialing a number that takes you to the number you want it, person you want to reach, you would ring, usually by bouncing the cradle of the phone a couple times, a person in the central headquarters of the company. And you would ask, could you connect me to Dr. Jones or whatever? And that person would take a literal plug and create a wire connection between the plug that represented your phone on their switchboard and the plug that represented or connected to the other person's. And operators were critical. And there was a time in American history in which some huge proportion of young women were employed as operators. And when this system went away, by automating it for the system we now know, it created a very large drop in employment for young women. There were a lot of romantic stories about operators. There were at least 2 or 3 pop songs about operators, but there also was a lot of suspicion of operators for listening in on phone calls. And that did happen. Now, the women operators were better than the earlier generation in the 19th century of male operators, which were young men, because they would get into swearing matches with the customers on the line. So the company quickly decided men were not appropriate for this job. And that created this huge wave for about a generation of jobs for young women as the operators.
That's wild. So there's always been phone etiquette, and it sounds like we as a society have always looked down upon listening in on one another's calls, that like privacy is part of phone etiquette. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about phone etiquette and how it has evolved over time. I understand that like you weren't supposed to say hello.
Yes. The phone company especially got interested, especially as the telephone increasingly became not just a businessman calling from one part of his factory to another part of his factory or to a client, but became part of daily life. The phone company was interested in keeping it all peaceable and polite and friendly. One of the issues was, and was discussed in the telephone literature and among telephone executives, is what is the proper addressing etiquette? When you learned how to write a letter in the old days, you're supposed to write, Mr. So-and-so and the address and so on. And they had realized that people were using this, I think, originally sort of a sailor's shout of hello, and it was considered vulgar.
Wow. I didn't know hello was a sailor's shout.
Yeah, I don't quote me on that because that's a vague recollection I have. But in any event, it was considered crude, unrefined.
Yeah.
And for a number of years, the phone company tried to teach its customers by putting in its written materials, even sometimes advertisements, the proper way to answer a telephone, which was to say, Mr. Jones speaking, or something like that. This was a failure on the part of the phone company. They eventually gave up, and in a later period decided that one of the romantic ways to talk about operators was to refer to them as the hello girls.
Oh.
This is not the only case in which sort of customers ended up resisting the phone company. But the phone company was also concerned that conversations be polite. And so they were concerned about use of profanity on the telephone.
Sure.
They wanted more and more customers. And if people felt that the experience of getting a phone call was a vulgar intrusion into the household.
Yep.
And then occasionally people would get into arguments, especially on party lines.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to call and they pick up the line. They realize it's being used by another member of the party line, and they wait and they try again. And then people start yelling at each other, and it all is not good for business, right? For the telephone business. So the phone company engaged in a lot of education in the 10s, 20s, and 30s, which included booklets for children in school.
Whoa.
About learning how to use the telephone. It included trying to dissuade people of myths, such as the idea that you might catch germs across the telephone line. It encouraged men with heavy mustaches to not get the mustache in the way of the speaker when you're talking on the phone, and so forth and so on. And people developed, with the help and sometimes outside the help of the phone company, a set of patterns that we generally understand as polite telephone etiquette.
Fascinating. Okay, my last question for you is, how did the telephone impact relationships? I would imagine that, it opened up the world, right? You felt more comfortable moving far away because you could keep in touch with your mom? No?
Well, that's certainly, a lot of people testify to exactly that, which is that the telephone enabled people to travel, to separate themselves physically from people they feel close to, but to stay in touch. So that's that theme of, I can leave my widowed mother alone on the farm, even if I move to town, because I can call her every day and she can call me.
Yeah.
There were a lot of speculations in the early years about what telephone life would mean for personal relationships, and a lot of concern that it was a device that would make relationships more impersonal, less common. People wouldn't stay in touch. It was very much thought of as a machine, a mechanical thing that got between you and the other person. To the extent to which I've been able, and I think other researchers been able to understand how the telephone shaped American social life, I think the way I would summarize it is it became a tool that people used to pursue the kinds of social activities they would have pursued anyway, but at a greater scale and with more efficiency. So one example of this is teenage chatter. We interviewed a number of people in my project who were kids at the time the telephone came in, and they would discuss how they would walk home with their friends and they would gossip, and then they would go their own ways to each house, and they would get on the phone and they would continue their gossip.
Yeah.
If the parent didn't insist on releasing the telephone.
Right.
And people used it to make rendezvous. It was a lot easier to meet a friend or meet a date by telephone than having to make a few trips to see people in person. And so I don't think it revolutionized American social life, but I think it lubricated in many ways. And that's the days in which the telephone was still rooted in a place. That is, you had to either be in a home or in a telephone booth to use it. But people did find it to be a very dramatic augmentation of their social lives.
Yeah.
In ways that became taken for granted. And I was surprised when I did the research on this, that within a couple of generations, this device, which in some ways is a miracle, that is, you can talk to anybody in the world, became part of the furniture.
Yeah.
Not a controversial, after the first 20 or 30 years, people weren't arguing about it anymore. It was just part of life and became ingrained into the way we run our social lives.
Yeah. Thank you so much for getting on the phone with us today. I'm so grateful.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. You've been listening to Hot and Bothered. We're a small show, so we need your support to run. If you can, please consider supporting us on patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod. If you love the show, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We are a Not Sorry production. I am the executive producer of the show, and we are edited and produced by Ariana Nettleman. We're distributed by Acast. We love to thank our soulmate level patrons. Molly Reilly, who we would chase through an airport to declare our love to, Becky Boo, who we would wait for hours on the top of the Empire State Building for, Lauren Bayer O'Connell, who we would bring up on stage to dance in front of the whole camp with, and Elizabeth Schweinsberg, whose heart we would play a game of one-on-one basketball for. Special thanks this week to Professor Claude Fischer and to our team, Julia Argy, Nikki Zoltan, AJ Uramas, Courtney Brown, and Stephanie Paulsell. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.